Okay, welcome everybody. It's nice to see you all. Welcome to the My Jewish Learning Siyyum on Tractate Moed Katan. My name is Rachel Steinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning and the Daily Dose of Talmud series. And it is delightful to see all of you again. It feels like I'm seeing you every month because these tractates are so short now. This is our penultimate tractate in Seder Moed. So once we get past Seder Moed, the big chunk of the Talmud that's all about holidays, we will then start doing longer tractates again in another month. But we have one more short one coming up after this one. I'm here with three amazing panelists. You probably know Asher Lopatin, Rabbi Asher Lopatin. Rabbi Lopatin, would you give a wave?
Hey, hello, welcome everyone. Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Rabbi Lopatin is the spiritual leader of Kehilat Eitz Chaim in Detroit, Michigan, and the past president of Yeshivat Chovavei Torah. And we are also joined by Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter.
Hi, everyone.
Rabbanit Fruchter is the spiritual leader of the South Philadelphia Shtibel, and she teaches a very popular Daf Yomi class. And a new face in person, though you know her in print. We're also delighted to be joined today by Professor Sara Ronis.
Hey everyone, mazel tov.
Thank you. Professor Ronis is a professor of theology at St. Mary's University, where she teaches courses on the Hebrew Bible and its interpretation. And she is the author of the very soon forthcoming Demon in the Details, a book all about demons in the Talmud. Before we start, I want to say it is wonderful to see so many of you here today, so many familiar faces. For me, there is one who is missing today. Midway through Tractate Moed Katan, we at My Jewish Learning lost a beloved colleague, Nate Geller, who was a really enthusiastic supporter of the Daily Dose from the very beginning. Nate really embodied Ahavat Yisrael, the love of the Jewish people, and was just a mensch. So today's Siyyum is dedicated in his memory. Zichrono livracha. Before we get started, I see you all are introducing yourselves in the comments. That's awesome. I also invite you to share with us things that you loved from this tractate, things that moved you. Thank you, Naomi, thank you for the remarks about Nate. Thank you in the comments. Things that moved you, things that you loved, things that challenged you, things you want to talk about. And hopefully we'll have a little time to incorporate that into our discussion today. Okay, so go ahead and add those comments. And as you know, our three panelists have also prepared small teachings from aspects of this daf for us. So I'm going to invite Professor Ronis to start for us today.
Thank you, Dr. Steinerman. And just so folks know, you are all very, very lucky that Dr. Steinerman is running this. We went to grad school together, and she has long been an intellectual mentor of mine. So I'm really thrilled to be here. So I wanted to start by talking about the Mishnah that actually opens our tractate, which has a sort of very brief line about what you can do on Chol HaMoed. And one of the things that you can do is mark graves. You can mark graves. And the Gemara picks up that Mishnah and talks about it a little bit later on the fifth daf, where I'm just going to read the quote. It says, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says, right, why on earth are we worried about marking graves? Because apparently the Torah tells us, the verse states in Ezekiel, when they that pass through shall pass through the land and see any man's bone, then shall he set up a sign by it. Right, we mark graves because the Torah tells us. Okay, cool. Why? So Rabbi Abahu then says, because we learn an allusion from Leviticus where it says about the leper, he shall cry, impure, impure. Which tells us that what we're really talking about is marking graves in order to to communicate that there are dead bodies in the ground. Right, because dead bodies convey death impurity, and we really need to stay away from those places. And the Gemara continues to discuss grave marking. How much, where, What if we get confused, right? All of these sort of technical detail. And it's really very clear that what they're worried about is the contagion of death impurity. And to be honest, I find something really cold in the conversation, right? I mean, they're talking about a person who has passed away and who was buried and who was loved and was part of a community. And those facts kind of get overridden by the discussion of the minutia of how many trees and how big the stones should be. But in thinking about the tractate as a whole, I'm struck by how the conversation circles back at the very end of the tractate, right? At the end of the tractate, we come back to ideas of death and loss. It starts by discussing how mourning is interrupted by various holidays, but then it morphs into a conversation regulating what a mourner can and cannot do at the different stages of mourning. And I want to actually read a little bit from a breita from an early teaching that's found on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph 21a. The sages taught, these are the activities that a mourner is prohibited from engaging in. He is prohibited from working and from bathing and from anointing and from engaging in sexual relations and from wearing shoes. And he is prohibited from reading in the Torah and in the prophets and in the writings, and from studying in the Mishnah, in the Midrash, and in the Halachot, and in the Talmud, and in the Agadot. But if the public needs him, he need not refrain. In a world where there was just so much to do to survive, both materially and in terms of all of the Jewish law that an adult Jew is supposed to do, the rabbis carve out this interesting protected space in which the mourner can mourn. Even activities that are themselves spiritually fulfilling, or even, dare I say, a mitzvah, are forbidden during this mourning period. Because the death of someone close to us really deserves the time and the space to mourn. And today, we live in a world where productivity culture is really strong and people are constantly feeling this pressure to do stuff and to check things off a list. And at the same time, we live in a world of like this very intense, what some people call toxic positivity, right? Put a smile on your face, smile through it, find the silver lining. The idea that the rabbis insist, no, you need to stop. You need to not do something. You need to sit with your feelings. Be present with how you're experiencing loss and mourning. I think it's a really profound rebuke of some of those tendencies. And thinking about that end sort of reframes how I think about the beginning of the tractate, right? I think the end of Moed Katan offers us a different way to think about the beginning. What if we don't think of marking graves as just a way of preventing the spread of death and purity? But instead, what if we think about it as carving off more space that recognizes our loss, right? No, I think it's worth noting that marking off space as sort of death impure comes with a real loss in and of itself, right? Comes with a real loss because you can't use that land for farming, you can't build a house on it, you can't set up a business on it. And so we're talking about real financial and physical losses in marking off those spaces as graves. In a post-70 CE world, right, the temple was destroyed in the year 70, and in a world after the destruction of the temple, when there isn't actually a need to be ritually impure 99% of the time, marking off that space still is I think a really important way to create physical space for mourning, marking mourning as not just something that happens in time, but that happens in real places. But of course, the end of the tractate talks about the loss of a loved one. And the beginning of the tractate, right, the graves that are described at the beginning of the tractate are forgotten graves, right? They're the unknown graves, the graves where no one has family that's coming to take care of it or pay for its upkeep. And so we've sort of lost track of it. And so perhaps one other thing that I think looking at the tractate in its beginning and its end really, really challenges us to do is to think about who we aren't remembering, right? Who aren't we remembering and how can we do better? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ronis. We have some questions in the comments about the details of the practices of burial. I'm going to read one out This is from Carla Sulzbach. She asks, we read a lot about burial practices that actually apply to Eretz Yisrael, such as cave burials, ossuaries, etc. This is like when you put the body exposed, and then later when it's just bones, you collect the bones and put them in an ossuary. She asks, how may these practices have differed from the situation of the Amoraim who were active in Sasanian Persia?
That is an excellent question. Hi, Carla. And what I would say is there are some really important big differences in how death is regulated in both countries, in both empires. You're absolutely right. In Eretz Yisrael, they would have put the bones in stone containers, and those of us who know, who sort of remember some of those purity laws, stone is a way to interrupt impurity, and so that would have helped in some ways. Death practices in Sasanian Babylonia were really complicated because Zoroastrians also, right, that's the group that lived, that sort of controlled the region, had a very strong sense of death and purity as well, and a very strong regulation of what could or could not happen. And so it is a bigger conversation than we can have right now, but I think what you really do see if you delve into some of those details is the way that each community is negotiating its own religious traditions in light of what the governments are or are not regulating, to some pretty interesting and different conclusions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. It's funny, this tractate opened with a conversation about what we can do on Chol HaMoed, those intermediate days of Passover and Sukkot, but I think really it is the last third of it about death and burial that just resonates so much more for so many of us these days. And I know Rabbanit Fruchter, you're also going to teach us about that. So I'm going to pass the virtual microphone to you.
Thank you so much. What an honor to be with all of you today. And Professor Ronis, first of all, I want to hear you talk all day about this stuff. This is awesome. I just picked up the Rabbinical Council of America Life Cycle Madrich, which guides us through the life cycle rituals. And I opened up the page about doing the unveiling of the stone. And it's just so interesting based on what you're saying, how they're contending with both that this is not really a thing, but also it must be a thing, something that we really need as human beings to make that space. So thank you so much. What I want to talk about, and I'm really exiting this Masechta today, thinking about how the topic of it was really happiness and sadness at the end of the day, joy and mourning. And I walked into the Masechta being like, oh, isn't it great that we have spaces carved out for joy, i.e. the festivals, and for grief, i.e. grieving, right? Mourning practices, also we see the wedding, the parallel of mourning, right? 7 days, you have all of these beautiful things. But my favorite part by far of the Masechta was actually complicating those things. When you had a moment of joy that needed to be tempered by someone's personal mourning, when you had an experience of mourning that had, some sort of joyous thing happen in the middle, like a festival, or my favorite in the earlier part of the Masechta, when you have two joys coming into conflict with each other, right? That we don't actually, in Judaism, have a flat version of either thing. There's even an idea, ein ma'arv and simcha b'simcha. You can't actually combine two kinds of joy, sorry. Right? There is no such thing as flat joy, right? We have to actually carve out, speaking of carving out, space for each of those specific experiences. Now, I want to just highlight one piece, and that's around all of our roles in making sure that this joy, this communal and personal joy is upheld, and grief can also be upheld. One of the most striking moments in my personal Daf Yomi shir was when we talked about cutting off Shiva. Like if the festival comes along and cuts Shiva off, there are 175 people in this room. I assume that for one of you, unfortunately, you've lost somebody and a Shiva has been cut short by a festival. Maybe it was an hour, maybe it was a few days, but often people share that they've been cheated in some way by having that Shiva taken away from them. I was struck by a discussion on Daf 19b and 20a about how that's not really accurate. Yes, the Shiva the restrictions of Shiva are canceled, right? So, and I see some activity in the chat about that idea. The restrictions are canceled, but you know what's not canceled? Nichum avelim, comforting the mourner. And I remember learning this on Daf 19 saying, oh, if someone passes away right before the holiday, yes, the restrictions go away, but people come and comfort them the whole holiday. And so therefore that doesn't need to be added on to the other end. And I tried to remember, has there ever been a time you go pay a Shiva call on Yontif, on the festival? No, we don't really do this. But I was looking into this idea, and there are customs across the Jewish world to be able to continue those visits even on the festival itself. And what a radical idea that there's this idea that, there's a great joy hanging over the Jewish people during the festivals, as we've learned around Chol HaMoed, v'samachta v'chagecha, you have to be joyous on your festival. But that actually is not canceling out the important gemilut chasadim, the important act of kindness of going to comfort the mourner. So let's just leave this Masechta. I'm carrying with me this invitation to remember that just because it's the festival doesn't mean there's a flat joy, doesn't mean that there isn't some sort of deep satisfaction in visiting the mourner during the festival and bringing them food. And, during a wedding, there isn't some sort of benefit in actually acknowledging, and you know about the broken glass, right? I mean, that there isn't some sort of benefit in inviting in grief and maybe different varying degrees. So on 19b and 20a, taking with me this amazing idea of continuing the Shiva visits, Nichum Avelim, on the festival. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbanit Fruchter. Karen, I see that you just posted a Yehuda Amikai poem for us that you're reminded of in all these conversations. And I thought it would actually be lovely if you could read it for us. Ben Harris, can you give Karen Alpert ability to unmute so she can share this poem with us? Sorry, I'm putting Ben on the spot. I didn't warn him. Karen, can we find you?
Ben is like the unknown knower. Where is
Ben is coordinating behind the scenes. Okay, maybe we will share that poem in a few minutes.
Hold on 1 second. I think we got it.
No, he just unmuted.
Okay. Karen, it is unusual that we get an opportunity to think through some modern Israeli poetry in this venue, and I love that you brought some Yehuda Amikai for us. So would you mind reading it for us?
This isn't the whole poem that I put in the chat, but it's part of it. And I thought of it also because today is my dad's yard site, and he was a rabbi. And so I was comforted by the end of the tractate. So I felt joy from the Siyyum at the same time that I'm thinking of him. So I felt this message deeply. Okay. A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every person. Kohelet was wrong about that. A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to arrange and confuse, to eat and to digest what history takes years and years to do.
Thank you, Karen. How long has it been since your father passed?
2 years.
2 years.
It's still fresh.
I imagine. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you for including me.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have some good questions filling up in the box for a little conversation, but Rabbi Lopatin, I'd like you to share your teaching next.
Okay, well, thanks so much. Now, so we have on this, the four of us, half rabbis and half professors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rabbis acting badly, and that's always a sort of, I don't know if
because professors never act badly, right?
Thanks. Okay, I have to tell my kids to avoid rabbis and professors now. So clowns are fine and strangers, but I don't know if this is more optimistic or more depressing, but once it talks about what a mourner can't do, and then it talks about what a person who is a leper, a spiritual kind of skin disease that the Torah talks about and that the rabbis talk about that doesn't exist anymore. Then it talks about, well, another category of sort of people who are separated from the community is people in nidui, people excommunicated, different levels of excommunication. And then on 17a, it's just such a rich Amud, a rich page talking about rabbis that were put into a nidui, into this excommunication. And I love it that it talks about a tsurba mirabanan. Tsurba mirabanan means sort of a brilliant, red-hot coal rabbi. A hot rabbi who is, I guess it's male or female, whatever, and the Talmud was male, probably, but someone who is so smart, so clever, that sometimes it's great, and sometimes it can be problematic. And this is a case where they are problematic, and they made the law for themselves, avidin l'nafshe, and didn't follow sort of the consensus. And then there's another one that Sanu Shumane, that he had a bad reputation. And so they put these rabbis, they excommunicated these rabbis. But then a fascinating question came up, and that is, but we need these rabbis, but we need rabbis in synagogues, so even, or wherever they were, or in the community. So even if they weren't so great, and even if their halachic, their legal rulings were not so great, or were not taken with enough thoughtfulness or consultation with other rabbis, maybe we should keep them because we need them. And this is so powerful, the Talmud, because again, the Talmud was written by rabbis. The Talmud is sort of, the union, the rabbis' union. But the Talmud says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, one of the greats from Eretz Yisrael, from Israel, Rabbi Yochanan says, why does it say, gives a verse of Siftei Kohen Yishmu Dana, a verse from Malachi. Anyway, it talks about that. He says that if a rabbi, and this could be a teacher, could be a legal authority, someone of authority in the community, is like Malach Hashem, is like an angel of God, then people are going to want to hear Torah. But if not, forget it. We'll give up the Torah, we'll give up the leadership, we'll sacrifice that because this person should not be in that position. And I thought that was just such a, it's such a powerful thing. It's such it says that the rabbi is not the ultimate authority. The ultimate authority is morality, is ethics, is the just society, is Torah and truth. And it's something really to keep in mind. And, as a rabbi of a synagogue, it's something, definitely to keep in mind. But then, interestingly, this same Amud, this same page of Gemara slips into something that is so interesting that when we're dealing with people acting bad, it understands that people will act bad. So first of all, it says, don't put them in a position of authority. And in fact, if someone acts so bad, Rabbi Lai has this thing, and, I'm not suggesting it, don't do it at home, but if someone, Adam mishkaber alav, if a person sees that their yetzer, their lust, their desires, their passions are overcoming to them, what should they do? The last thing they should do is to abuse their power and their authority. What the Rabbi Eli says is go to a place where no one knows who you are, wear dark, and do what you want to do. Now, again, he's not saying that's not the ideal, but the key thing is, and the sad thing is that we see people that are in positions of authority abusing that authority. Everyone has lusts and desires and passions and temptations, but you have to step back and say, how do I best deal with these passions? The best way, if you can overcome them, of course. And Rashi tries to say that, commenting on that, and quoting Rav Haigal, try to, no, maybe not. But the main thing is get away from authority. And finally, we deal with the shivcha of Beit Rebbe, the servant of the house of Rabbi, it's the opposite. It's someone who's really good, but they're a servant. She's a servant, but she's empowered to put someone who's acting wrongly in excommunication, in cherem. So we go from this rabbi abusing his power that's pushed away to a person who just really has this lust or whatever, and got to go to some place where no one knows you, where you're not going to exploit at least your power, to a person who is relatively low in the power structure, a servant in the house of Rabbi. It is in the house of Rabbi, of the exilar, or the authority, the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the prince, but still a low person. And if she sees something wrong, she actually saw someone beating their child, and perhaps leading to that child to react and beat the father. So she saw a father, she put that father in excommunication. The idea is that if you think, who am I? I'm powerless. I'm a nobody. We have to speak up to the truth. So this Yud Zayin takes us all the way from a powerful person who really needs to understand that they're not all powerful, to a very lowly person who needs to understand, as we all do, that we have to step up and do what we can do. And the Talmud affirms her excommunication, the servant of Rebbe's excommunication, that it stands, and justifies it. And it's actually the halacha. You are not allowed to, nowadays, honestly, we don't smack kids at all, time out. Then people question, is a timeout okay? But I don't know people that smack their kids, but even in the Talmudic period, you're not allowed to do it once they were 13 or 12, once they became an official adult. So the Shifcha, the servant of Rebbe, really rises to the challenge, and our society has to be open to that, to people who are relatively powerless being able to point out the truth that needs to be pointed out.
Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin. All right, we have a little bit of time for questions, so please go ahead and if you have things you want to ask or talk about, pop them into the chat. Professor Ronis, they heard that you study demons, and they may remember that you wrote about demons for us all the way back in Pesachim, and even before that. Did you write about them in Brachot as well? Maybe? No,
I hadn't joined you yet in Brachot.
You hadn't joined us yet in Brachot. Okay. Mark Schneider, Ben Harris, can we cold call on Mark Schneider here? He wrote in the comments something I thought was kind of interesting, provocative. He says he thinks of demons in the Talmud as ET visitors. Mark, you want to tell us more about your thoughts there, and we'll see what Professor Ronis has to say.
Yeah, sure. It's because it's such a long period, a long time ago, and
but we can't see you.
Oh, how about that?
Maybe it's just me.
Okay. It was such a long time ago that, and they may have seen these people as strange, a demon, because a demon is a kind of a fantasy figure. And so it just occurred to me, because we're all into this field now of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and it's coming into the common knowledge that maybe that could have been what was going on. What they call demons was just something extra out of this world.
I think
that's about. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think the key word there is the word strange, right? I mean, this idea of these beings that are changeable and scary, but also really interesting in all kinds of ways, I think is profoundly strange. And I think what we're seeing in the time period is people trying to make sense of the strangeness. And I think what you're commenting right now is exactly right. Us today reading this, it's almost doubly strange, and all kinds of theories and ideas can come up. And I think that's part of what's exciting about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely strange. Definitely strange. Okay, we have a couple of people who want to talk about sort of the psychology of mourning and this idea in rabbinic texts that we should give time for mourning, but not too much time for mourning. And I don't have a specific question for you all, but I was wondering if you could pick up that thread about this idea that we do definitely take time and a pause for mourning, but then things like a festival can take priority. And then also we might not want to mourn too long. We had a really poignant story toward the end of the tractate where there was a woman who was mourning for a very long time. And then a rabbi warned her that she needed to stop. She was mourning one child out of 7, right? She had 7 sons and she was mourning one of them. And the rabbi, I don't remember which rabbi it was. I'm sure half of you do. So please go ahead and tell us in the comments. The rabbi tells her, look, stop. You shouldn't keep mourning or you will kill you will kill somebody else. And sure enough, she keeps mourning and then the other sons die. And then he says, you need to stop or you'll die. And she keeps mourning and then she also dies. I'm curious what you guys make of that story. People seem interested in discussing it a little bit. Dasi, I see, Rabbanit Fruchter, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I'm so glad someone brought this story up. Yes, poignant, very poignant. It actually gets brought down the halacha in the authorities kind of over the generations, including in Maimonides, where he basically says, Al yitkasha adam al meto, a person shouldn't be hard on themselves about their deceased, yoter midai, excessively. And just this phrase, yitkasha, like a person shouldn't beat themselves up. Right, which is really quite powerful. And right after this story, which was Rav Huna, by the way, who it's on 27b, if anyone would like to peek, this woman eventually loses her life. And just thinking about if that's literal or figurative, how does she lose her life by excessive grief? The scriptural source for such a thing is quoted, but then we see a funny phrase. One should not mourn yoter mikishir, more than the measure, which is actually a very, very dry halachic term, like a shiur, a measure, like we talk about it in terms of food or, different things like that. And the word I keep thinking of is container, right? It's like the entire Masechet Moed Katan's description of mourning is like, here's the Tupperware for this. Here's the container. Don't go above and beyond the container because we have a shear. We have a measure like for every other halacha. And it just wakes you up actually in terms of the power of halachic living to legislate even our emotional lives, right? To have that container and not go beyond. I would love to hear what my colleagues think about this.
Yeah, I would especially like to hear, especially for the rabbis here on the panel who are in a pastoral role. I mean, I don't know. I think losing a child, I have 3 of them. I'm lucky I have not lost a child. I could imagine that it would be difficult to stop mourning that excessively. And I could also imagine that Rav Huna telling me, you better stop, wouldn't really succeed for me. I had a lot of sympathy for this woman.
Just one of there's a lot of transitional phases in the laws of mourning. And one of the things that I think is so powerful is the Kaddish, and that, really has developed into something that people cherish. It's barely mentioned in Talmudic period, but the idea of that you traditionally need to say it in a minyan, in a quorum, and that forces you to leave the home and to go out and to go into the community. So, and the community has to answer you. It can't be something that you say silently. It has to be something that you speak and the community answers. And of course, Kaddish is not a mournful prayer. It's a prayer of praising God. But most importantly, whatever the words mean, it's a conversation with the synagogue. And I remember a dear family that lost a child in a tragic accident, a hit and run. And one of the things they said was that what bothered them the most is when people sort of try to act normal to them, like would avoid them or wouldn't say anything. And, they wanted some engagement. And I think the Kaddish is a way of sort of a middle ground where you're still in a sense of mourning and sadness, but you are engaging with other people that gets you out of the house. I'll just say one other, I just think that minhag, and I don't know, maybe it's a American custom of walking around the block at the end of Shiva. It's such a powerful thing that you're engaging. Again, you're forcing people to come out into the world, and then they go back. They continue their mourning in different ways, but it's sort of a gentle way of the shiur that Rabbanit Dasi talked about, like, that you're out of this container. And my wife especially, I know for her mother, the Kaddish meant so much and was so therapeutic and really helped her get through that period of mourning.
Thank you so much.
Can I just add one quick thing? I'm seeing a lot of folks in the comments talk about this. So one thing that I think is right. So some folks I think are psychologists and noted that there's a technical term for this now, which is complicated grief or prolonged grief disorder. And about 10% of mourners are sort of classed as falling into this category. And I think a lot of folks are talking about this in terms of its impact on the other children in this really painful story. I just read a YA novel called Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which I highly recommend if you like sort of fantasy novels. But the main character is struggling with this. And I think what's really stark to me in reading that together with the Daf was how it profoundly affects her own ability to function in the world, right? The character, the ways that it shapes her life and how she sees the world are really profound, even beyond how it's affecting the people around her. And both of those things are happening at the same time.
Yeah. I sort of read the Rav Huna story a similar way, Professor Ronis. I couldn't read it as a literal God killed her children and then her because she was in so much pain, but that her pain just distorted everything, that it ruined her relationship to everyone, to her children, and then to the whole world. That is sort of how I saw it too. Okay, this is not an easy end for a tractate, is it? But let's go ahead and move on to the last few lines. Professor Ronis is going to read the last few lines for us, which do turn us back a little bit from this very heavy discussion we've been involved in most of today and also for the last few weeks with this tractate.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to end on a very, very high note. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, Talmidei Chachamim ein lahem menucha afilu leolam haba. Shneamar yelchu mechayil el chayil yira'eh el Elohim b'tzion. Torah scholars have no rest, even in the world to come. As it is stated, they go from strength to strength. Every one of them appears before God in Zion.
Why do you think they have no rest in the world to come?
You got to keep learning.
What are they doing?
You've got to keep learning.
That's so depressing. Like, finally, the Rashi in the beginning of Vayeshev says, in this world, tzaddikim don't have any shalva, any rest, but at least in the world to come. When do we get to retire? But you're right. That's it. We got to keep
This
going.
is the growth mindset, right? What is heaven? Even more time to learn and experience the joy of learning new things.
Totally.
I feel like it takes some of the pressure off me. I don't need to know it all now. I don't even need to know it all by the time I die.
There you go. I don't know. I feel like the world always gets in the way, right? It's like there's too many books to read. There's too much to learn. To think I'll just be able to read and learn new things. I don't know.
That's right. Was Kohelet, Ecclesiastes said there's no end to the making of books, and that was back when they were writing them by hand 2,000 years ago. How many do we have now?
And And also, that's that Hasidic, the Yiddish story, I forgot who wrote it, that the person doesn't want to go to heaven. They want to go to hell because that's where they can really help people and work with people, do kiruv, do reaching out to people. So they don't want this lazy heaven. They want action. So, it's something, it's a challenge.
It is, but the last pasuk says, right? The last verse says, we're going to have the strength to do it, right? It's a challenge, but it's a challenge that we'll have the capacity to meet.
Awesome. Yeah, I think awesome. All right, let's close it there. Sorry. Rabbanit Fruchter. Oh, too many windows. I'm clicking around. Rabbanit Fruchter, you're going to lead us in the Hadran.
Awesome.
And take us out of this tractate so tomorrow we can take a big breath and dive into Chagiga.
Can't wait. We just learned a few lines ago, when you leave the shul, you go to the study hall. When you leave the study hall, you go to the shul. We just back and forth. It's beautiful. And maybe Ben can put the Hadran in the chat as we move on to the final part of our experience together today. As we say, there we go. Sorry. Hadran alach ve'elu megalchen. We conclude the third chapter of Moed Katan, Uslikala Masachas Moed Katan, and the entire tractate of Moed Katan. Let's go. Hadran alach Masachas Moed Katan, v'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masachas Moed Katan, v'da'atach alan. Lo nisnashem minach Masachas Moed Katan, v'lo sisnashim minan. Lo ba'alma hadain, v'lo ba'alma ta'aseh. Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avosenu, shetehei sorascha u'manusenu ba'olam hazeh, u'tehei imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abamari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorchav bar Papa, Ata bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Arab na Adonai Eloheinu es divrei Torascha b'finu. Sweeten the words of Torah in our mouths. U'befifios amcha beit Yisrael, and in the mouths of all of the nation of Bnei Yisrael, on every Zoom screen in the world. B'niyah nachnu b'tzatzah, einu b'tzatzah amcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha. Me'oivai techachmeni mitzvosecha ki le'olam hili. Yehi libi tamim b'chukecha lema'an lo evosh. Le'olam lo eshkach pikudecha kivam chisani. Baruch atah Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Amen, amen, amen. Selah va'ed. Rabbi Lopatin.
Amen, amen. Modim anachnu lefanecha. We are so grateful, Hashem Adonai Eloheinu v'Eloheinu, shesamtech alkeinu miyoshvei beit hamedrash, that you placed us in the Beit Midrash learning Torah. Lo samtech alkeinu miyoshvei kranot. Who needs to be in those other places doing all sorts of other things? Sha'anu mashkim ve'hem mashkim. Everyone wakes up early, but anu mashkim divrei Torah. We wake up for Torah and for good deeds, everything Torah represents. Ve'hem mashkimim lidvarim betelim. There are other folks that are doing other things, not us. Anu amelim ve'hem amelim. But everyone's working hard. But anu amelim mekablim schar. Our work is, Torah work is productive. Anu ratzim ve'hem ratzim. Oh my goodness. People, everyone's running everywhere. Running. Anu ratzim l'chayolam haba. But we are running for that life of the world to come, where we can learn more Torah and run some more about Torah. Ve'hem ratzim l'ver shachat. Shneimar v'taluhim toridem l'ver shachat anshei damim v'mirma lo yechatzu damam. V'ani eftach b'cha. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Elohai, may it be thy will. Kashem God, Kashem Shazartani L'Sayim Masechet Moed Katan, just as you helped us finish this Tractate Moed Katan Kentez Reinu. Likewise, may you help us Adchil Masechtot Usfarim Acharim L'Saimam. Keep on learning more Masechtot, more tractates, and finish them. Lilmod Ulamed, to learn, but to teach also. Lishmor Velasot, and to fulfill what Torah is all about. L'kayem ekol divrei Timut Recha Be'ava, U'zchut kol hatanayim ve'morayim ve'talmidei chacham yamod li l'zari l'children hamush haTorah mipi u'mivi zari ad olam. V'kayem bi, may it be fulfilled within all of us. Banu bid alecha tancheu tach b'shoch bacha tishmor alecha v'hakitzota hi tisichecha. Torah with us 24/7. Kivi yerbu yamecha v'yasivu l'chashon chayim orech yimim v'mina b'smola osher v'chavod. Adonai oz lamo yitain. May God give strength to God's people. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless us all with peace. And now the special Kaddish that is for a time of finishing up of Masechta, which gives us so much hope for this world. Oh my goodness, this is like with all our learning, there's hope for the world to be rebuilt and to be a place of peace. So we add that sort of messianic vision. I'll stand up if you like, and please feel free to say it with me. Yitkadel v'yitkadesh shemei Rabbah ve'almadu atid litcharato l'chayim etayu l'azka yathon l'chay alma l'mivnei karta d'Yerushalayim l'shalchel hechalam begavei l'me'aker pulchana nuchra min ara l'atava pulchana dishmaya l'atre v'yamlich kutshab richu machutei v'karei b'chayechon u'limachon b'chayecho beit Yisrael b'agalav v'zman karim v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbam v'rach l'olam Ulamel Maya, Yitbarach, Vishtabach, Vitpar, Vitramam, Vitnasei, Vithadar, Vitalev, Vitalal, Shmei, Vikudisha, Barichu, Le'elam, in Kober, Chatav, Shirata, Tush, Bechatav, Nechamata, Damiram, Be'alma, Vimru, Amen. And now, blessing for everyone learning Torah. Al Yisrael, Rabbanan, Val Tamidehon, Val Kol Tamidehon, Val Komadaskin, Val Raita, Vivatra Hadain. This place, atar everywhere. Yehei lahon ulachon shlama rabachina v'chisa v'rachamei v'chaye arichem v'zonei v'vichei for kanamin kodam avon v'shmai v'ara v'imru amen. Yehei shalom marabam v'shmai v'chaim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mamav hu yaseh b'rachamav shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God, who makes peace in the heavens, please speedily make peace on earth, and let us say amen.
Amen. Thank you all for being here, for studying with us, for your amazing questions and comments. Thank you to Rabbanit Fruchter, to Rabbi Lopatin, to Professor Ronis, all of you for writing for us, for speaking with us today, for thinking through hard things and interesting things, and for being so available and generous with your time for us and for learning. We really appreciate it. And we will see all of you again tomorrow morning to start Masechet Chagiga. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Mazel tov, everyone.
Bye.